Sergeant Daniel Carter had always known one thing: his luck would run out someday. He just hadn't expected it to be on Yelvara 6, a remote jungle-covered colony world where people were vanishing without a trace. His squad had been deployed under standard recon and rescue protocols, but within hours of arrival, the mission had gone straight to hell. The jungle was alive in ways that didn't make sense. Shadows moved without sources, plants shifted as if aware, and worst of all, something was hunting them. Weapons fire flashed in the darkness, but their attackers never left bodies. One by one, his team fell, silent takedowns, unseen strikes. "We need extraction," Carter had shouted into his comm, breath ragged as he pressed against a tree, his rifle sweeping the undergrowth. No response, just static. Then, something sharp sank into his neck. Paralysis spread through his limbs before he could react. The last thing he saw was his remaining squadmates being dragged into the foliage, and then darkness claimed him. He woke up to the sterile gleam of silver-lit walls, a cold metal table beneath him, his body strapped down, restraints humming with an energy field that tingled against his skin. Carter groaned, his head pounding. Then he heard it, a series of clicks, followed by a voice, alien but clear through an unseen translator. "He is awake. Begin analysis." His vision adjusted to the figures surrounding him. Tall, insectoid beings with too many eyes and chittering mandibles, their exoskeletons glistening under the light. The Shithari. Whispers of them had circulated in the galactic underworld: scientists, geneticists, and manipulators who worked in the shadows. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, they were feared. One of them leaned closer, studying him like a lab specimen. Humanity, paradox of survival. Too adaptable, too resilient. Carter clenched his jaw. "I'd say thanks, but I don't think that's a compliment." The Shithari ignored him, turning to a console where holographic displays showed anatomical data. His data. "Your kind evolved on a death world. It should not be possible. Yet you thrive. We must understand." Carter felt his pulse quicken. He knew where this was going. Another Shithari stepped forward, holding a sleek injector filled with a sickly, glowing liquid. "We will learn." The needle pierced his skin before he could protest. Heat flared through his veins, his muscles seizing as something foreign invaded his body. His vision blurred, his heartbeat thundered in his ears, and then pain. A firestorm racing through his nervous system, his very cells screaming in protest. Carter gritted his teeth, refusing to give them the satisfaction of hearing him break. But then something changed. The pain didn't stay pain. It shifted, adapted. His body wasn't rejecting the serum. It was absorbing it, using it. The Shithari had expected resistance. They hadn't expected this. The restraints that had once held firm now felt flimsy. His fingers flexed. The metal groaned under his grip. One of the Shithari twitched its antennae in alarm. "This is unexpected." Carter met its gaze, a slow grin forming. "Yeah, you have no idea." Then, with a twist of his wrists, the restraints snapped. Panic erupted in the lab. The Shithari scrambled, shouting orders in their chittering language. Security alarms blared. Carter wasted no time. His body felt different, stronger, faster. He moved before his brain fully processed the actions, ducking under a spray of energy fire and closing the distance between him and the nearest guard. One strike sent the alien sprawling. Another disarmed the second before they could even react. Carter took their weapon, a sleek plasma rifle, and turned it against the scientists. "You wanted to see what a human can do? Let's give you a demonstration." The facility descended into chaos as he tore through it. Alarms blared, doors slammed shut in emergency lockdowns, and security teams tried in vain to contain him. But Carter wasn't just escaping, he was hunting. He could sense them, not telepathically but through some new awareness. Micro-expressions, pheromones, subtle changes in the air. His body picked up everything. The Shithari had tried to make him a weapon. Instead, they had created something they couldn't control. As he reached the hangar, Carter spotted his exit, an experimental dropship. A squad of heavily armed Shithari stood between him and freedom. One of them, larger than the others, stepped forward. "You are an anomaly," it said, leveling a high-energy weapon at him. "You cannot be allowed to leave." Carter smirked. "Guess what? I don't take orders from bugs." Then he moved. The fight lasted seconds. His speed outmatched their reflexes, his strength overpowered their defenses. When the last Shithari fell, Carter boarded the ship and powered it up. As the hangar doors opened to the void of space, a new problem presented itself. A war fleet, hundreds of ships, bristling with weapons all aimed at him. "Okay," Carter muttered to himself, gripping the controls. "Now this just feels personal." His enhanced mind processed information at an impossible rate. He calculated vectors, enemy positions, gaps in their formation. Then he acted. The dropship shot forward, weaving through enemy fire with inhuman precision. The Shithari had underestimated him. Again, far across the system, a Zenith Accord patrol ship picked up the chaos. Inside, two figures watched the unfolding battle: Kellner, a reptilian strategist of the Vrak Coalition, and Dr. Alrin Voss, a skeptic of humanity's capabilities. Voss stared at the screen in disbelief. This is impossible. No species should be able to do this." Kellner just chuckled, watching as Carter tore through the blockade. And yet, here he is. The galactic community had always debated humanity's place among the stars. Today, that debate ended. Because one human had just taken on an empire and won. Pain. It was the first thing Daniel Carter felt, burning through every nerve in his body like liquid fire. His muscles ached, as if they were tearing apart and rebuilding themselves at the same time. His skin crawled, his senses sharpened, and then silence. For the first time since waking up in the lab, he felt something different. Clarity, a stillness. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he felt them. The Shithari scientists weren't speaking, but their fear was screaming at him. It wasn't telepathy. It was something new. He could detect the pheromones in the air, the micro-expressions on their insectoid faces, the minute temperature shifts in their exoskeletons. They were afraid. And they were right to be. This isn't possible. One of the Shithari clicked in frantic horror, its mandibles quivering as it watched him. The restraints, unbreakable a moment ago, suddenly seemed flimsy. Daniel barely had to try. His muscles flexed, and the metal cracked like brittle wood. He stood, stretching his arms, feeling a power he had never known surge through his veins. The Shithari scrambled backward, shouting orders. Security alarms blared. Doors slammed shut. The first wave of guards stormed in, tall, armored enforcers wielding plasma rifles. They didn't even get the chance to fire. Daniel moved before they could react. His body responded to threats before his brain fully processed them. He weaved through the guards like a phantom, striking with bone-crushing precision. The first soldier's head snapped back. The second was thrown across the room. The third barely had time to scream before his rifle was torn from his hands and used against him. The Shithari had prepared for an enhanced human. They had not prepared for this. "What is he?" one of the Shithari shrieked. "We made a mistake," another whispered in horror. Security measures activated, electric barriers, nerve gas, automated turrets designed to take down the deadliest predators in the Shithari Empire. None of it mattered. His reflexes outpaced the targeting systems. His lungs filtered out the toxins before they could take effect. His body shrugged off injuries that should have been fatal. He wasn't just a human soldier anymore. He was something else. Something faster, stronger, more dangerous. And the best part? He wasn't running. He wasn't escaping. He was hunting. Beyond the Shithari research facility, the sprawling interstellar community remained blissfully unaware of the nightmare unfolding. Across the stars, humanity was still a relative newcomer. They had yet to earn their place among the galactic elite. Earth, a planet that had survived millennia of war, famine, and catastrophe, was considered an anomaly. A death world, they called it, a place where everything fought to survive. To many species, humans were a mystery. To some, they were a threat. To the She-Theory, they had been a curiosity. Until now, the Galactic Council, seated in its vast hall of towering metal spires, had been monitoring the She-Theory for years. They had suspected illegal experimentation but had never been able to prove it. That changed when the distress call arrived. The transmission flickered to life before the council. High geneticist Vralik, his mandibles twitching, spoke in rapid, panicked tones. The experiment has escaped. It is adapting beyond control. We request immediate containment assistance. Experiment. Kellner, a reptilian strategist from the Vrak coalition, leaned forward, his scaled fingers tapping the table. What experiment?
Vralik hesitated.
A human. A hush fell over the chamber. Even Dr. Auron Voss, a skeptic of humanity's potential, narrowed his eyes. You experimented on a Deathworlder? Vralik didn't respond. Then the transmission cut to security footage. A lone human, faster than anything they had seen, moved like a specter through the She-Theory base. Turrets failed to track him. Guards fell before they could react. He wasn't just escaping. He was dismantling their defenses. Kellner exhaled sharply. By the stars. This is impossible, Dr. Voss muttered. No species should be able to do this. And yet, Kellner said, here he is. Back inside the She-Theory facility, Daniel reached the control room, his enhanced senses detecting every life form within. Fear radiated from them like a stench. Listen to me, human, Vralik began, raising his clawed hands in a placating gesture. You do not understand what has been done to you. We can help you. Daniel tilted his head. He could hear the subtle shift in Vralik's tone, the micro-tremors in his voice that indicated deception. Lies. He could smell them, taste them. No, Daniel said, his voice eerily calm. I think you've done enough. With a flick of his wrist, he sent a shockwave through the air, shattering the control panel beside Vralik. Sparks erupted. Systems failed. The facility's lights flickered as Daniel stepped forward. Vralik backed away. You cannot. I can. Daniel's eyes burned with something primal, something terrifying. And I will. A deep rumble echoed through the facility as explosions erupted across its structure. Daniel had triggered a cascading overload in the power systems. The She-Theory wouldn't be experimenting on anyone else. As alarms blared, Daniel turned toward the docking bay. A stolen She-Theory dropship sat waiting. He moved, faster than he ever had, his body responding with perfect efficiency. He had no plan, no destination, but one thing was certain. He wasn't done. As the dropship roared to life and ascended into the void of space, Daniel's gaze hardened. The She-Theory had created something they couldn't control. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would learn what happened when you pushed a Deathworlder too far. The She-Theory Empire had always operated in secrecy, conducting experiments that no ethical civilization would dare attempt. They were genetic sculptors, biological purists, and manipulators of life itself. No one had ever dared challenge them, not because they were invincible, but because no one knew enough to fight back. Until now, they had taken a human, Sergeant Daniel Carter, and subjected him to their grand experiment. They had sought to refine him, to twist his biology into something superior, something they could control. But instead of breaking, he had adapted. Instead of failing, he had evolved. And now he was loose. This is impossible. High geneticist Vralik hissed, his mandibles clicking in barely concealed panic as he paced the control room. How can a single test subject overwhelm our entire facility? Our security measures are absolute. The She-Theory scientists around him exchanged nervous glances. They had never seen their leader like this before. It was not fear of failure that shook him. It was fear of the unknown. They had tested thousands of species, extracted traits from apex predators across the galaxy, but none had reacted like this. Containment teams are failing, a technician cried out. Subject Carter has... The transmission cut to static. The room went deathly silent. Vralik turned to the holoscreen, where grainy security footage flickered. Carter moved like a phantom, his enhanced body blurring through hallways, weaving between guards before they could react. He hit with brutal efficiency, one guard thrown into a wall with bone-crushing force, another disarmed and incapacitated before his weapon had fully charged. He wasn't just fighting to escape. He was hunting them.
Frolic's mandibles twitched.
Deploy the enforcers. All of them. The Shithari war fleet arrived within hours, encircling the planet in a blockade of cold, silver warships. Hundreds of vessels, each one bristling with weapons powerful enough to glass a colony, locked onto the research station below. All this, Carter muttered as he watched from the cockpit of a stolen Shithari dropship. Just for little old me? His reflexes, enhanced beyond human limits, worked faster than thought. He angled the ship down, dodging plasma fire as he zipped between two warships. The fleet scrambled, ships adjusting to track his impossible flight pattern. He was already out of their predicted range before their weapons had time to adjust. Deep in the command center of the Zenith Accord's patrol ship, two figures watched the chaos unfold on their monitors. "This is insane," Dr. Alrin Voss muttered. He was a pale-skinned scientist from the Accord, his expression frozen somewhere between horror and fascination. A human shouldn't be able to do this. They're primitive. Kellner, a reptilian strategist from the VRAC coalition, chuckled, a low, rasping sound. And yet, he gestured to the screen. There he is. Voss shook his head. This has to be a fluke. The Shithari must have given him something, some enhancement they didn't account for. There's no way a Deathworld species should be outperforming a fleet of one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Kellner's eyes gleamed. Perhaps that's because you never truly understood what a Deathworld species is. Carter's stolen ship broke through the blockade. The Shithari fleet scrambled, trying to reposition, but it was too late. He had already escaped into deep space. His body ached with the strain of his new abilities, his mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. They had tried to turn him into a weapon. Instead, they had made him into something they could never control, something that knew exactly what they had done, and he was coming back for them. The Galactic Council chambers were a place of authority, a place where the greatest powers of the galaxy met to determine the future of entire civilizations. The massive circular hall was adorned with holographic constellations, each representing an empire that had a seat at the table. Delegates of over 50 species gathered, their varied forms and technologies on display, a testament to the vast diversity of life among the stars. But today, the chamber was filled with something rare: fear. High geneticist Vralik of the Shithari stood at the center of the room, his multifaceted eyes darting from one delegate to another. His mandibles clicked sharply as he addressed the assembly. This abomination is proof that humanity is too unstable to be allowed into the galactic fold. His voice was cold, calculated. A Deathworld species was dangerous enough, but now they have demonstrated what they truly are: biological threats capable of unsanctioned evolution. This soldier is no longer human. He is an anomaly, a monster. We demand immediate action. The chamber erupted in debate. Murmurs spread among the delegates, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged skeptical glances. Humanity had always been an anomaly, thriving in conditions that should have been lethal. But this was something new. Kellner of the VRAC coalition stood, his reptilian form imposing yet composed. "You claim humanity is dangerous," he said, his voice carrying weight. "And yet it was you who took one of them. It was you who experimented on him. And it was you who failed to contain what you created. If there is a monster here today, it is of your own making." Before the Shithari could respond, the chamber's security alarms blared. The room shuddered as reinforced doors sealed shut. Defense turrets emerged from the walls, scanning for threats. A squad of armored guards took position at the entrance, their weapons primed. Then the doors exploded. A thick plume of smoke filled the air. The security personnel, trained to handle the deadliest beings in the galaxy, were already down, unconscious, but alive. And at the center of the devastation stood Daniel Carter. He moved with an unnatural precision, each step controlled, calculated. His presence alone sent a wave of unease through the chamber. He was no longer just a soldier. His eyes, once human, now gleamed with something more, something alien. The Council's highest security measures had failed to stop him, and he hadn't even tried to fight them. The Shithari delegation recoiled as he approached. His gaze locked onto Vralik, then swept across the room, taking in the gathered species. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced the chamber. You want to blame humanity? Fine. He let the words sink in, his tone measured, unwavering. But we didn't do this. You did. You took me, you experimented on me, and now you're afraid of what you created. A long pause followed. The tension was palpable, thick enough to suffocate. Then, Daniel added, his voice quiet, yet deadly. And if you think this is bad, imagine what happens if you push us any further. The silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke, no one moved. But in that moment, every species in the galaxy understood something very, very important. They had underestimated humanity. The Galactic Council chambers stood silent. It was an uneasy silence, the kind that settled before something irreversible happened. Delegates from over 50 species sat in their towering seats, their varied forms shifting nervously. The constellations above twinkled in holographic displays, but no one paid them any mind. Today, the stars were not the center of attention. The Shithari delegation stood rigid, their exoskeletons glinting under the silver lights. High geneticist Vralik clicked his mandibles, his multifaceted eyes scanning the room. Then, with a sharp chitter, he spoke. Humanity is an anomaly. His voice echoed through the chamber. A chaotic, volatile species that should never have been allowed into the wider galaxy. Now, thanks to their reckless existence, a genetic aberration roams free. They must be contained before their instability spreads. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Some species nodded in agreement. Others remained silent, uncertain. For years, humanity had been a curiosity, a death-world species that somehow thrived despite all odds. But after the events on Yelvara 6, the debate had taken a darker turn. Then, Kellner of the Vrak Coalition leaned forward. His reptilian eyes gleamed with something between amusement and irritation. An anomaly, you say? His voice was smooth but firm. And yet, it was not humans who performed illegal experiments in the dark. It was you. If anything, this proves that humanity is far more adaptable than we ever imagined.
Vralik's mandibles clattered in frustration.
You don't understand. The human Daniel Carter is no longer what he was. He is something else. A predator beyond reason. Before Kellner could respond, the chamber's security alarms blared. A deep, resonating chime signaled an emergency lockdown. The lights flickered, and the massive entrance doors sealed shut with a heavy clang. Panic swept through the delegates. Then, with a thunderous explosion, the doors shattered. Smoke billowed, and through the haze, a lone figure stepped forward. The guards stationed at the entrance lay unconscious, their weapons untouched. And standing at the heart of the chaos was Daniel Carter. His presence sent a wave of unease through the room. He moved with a calm, measured precision. His eyes, once entirely human, now glowed faintly, something more than they had been before. His posture was relaxed, yet predatory. Vralik took an instinctive step back. Daniel let the silence stretch before speaking. You call me an aberration. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, something dangerous. But you made me. You kidnapped me. You experimented on me. And now you're afraid of what you created. Vralik's mandibles twitched, but no words came. The rest of the chamber sat frozen. Even Dr. Alrin Voss, who had long dismissed humans as reckless creatures, now looked at Daniel with something bordering on awe. Daniel took a slow step forward, his eyes sweeping over the gathered species. Humanity isn't looking for a fight, he said. We're not here to conquer. We're not here to dominate. But if you come for us, if you threaten us, if you try to break us, we will survive. We will adapt. And we will end it. Silence. Then a whisper of conversation among the delegates. The VRAC coalition representatives exchanged glances, their skepticism fading. The fear that had once surrounded humanity was shifting into something else. Respect. Dr. Voss finally spoke. His voice was quieter than usual. This is not what I expected. He had spent years viewing humanity as a strange accident of evolution. Now, faced with undeniable proof of their resilience, he found himself re-evaluating everything. Kellner grinned, his sharp teeth glinting. It seems the galaxy has underestimated you, Carter. Daniel gave a small, wry smile. Seems like a pattern. By the time the emergency protocols were lifted, the debate had shifted entirely. The She-Theri, once untouchable in their influence, now found themselves on the defensive. Their secret experiments had been exposed, their authority shattered. They had sought to craft the perfect biological weapon. Instead, they had created the perfect warning. The aftermath reshaped the galactic landscape. The She-Theri were sanctioned, their research facilities dismantled. Their fleets were forced to retreat from neutral space. Where they had once worked in the shadows, they were now under constant scrutiny. But the biggest change was we don't want war. We don't want control. But we will not be victims. If you stand with us, we will stand with you. If you come for us, we will not fall. That is our promise. That is our warning. The Council had a choice. They could fear humanity. They could push them away. But deep down, they knew the truth. Humans weren't just another species. They were here to stay. Disclaimer. The story you just watched is fictional, created to explore themes of unintended consequences and the resilience of the human spirit. Its purpose is to entertain and provoke thought about the ethical implications of experimentation and the unforeseen outcomes that can arise from underestimating one's subjects.